Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Town Council meeting of March 5th, 2019, otherwise known as Fat Tuesday, I believe. Can we get a roll call, please?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Syak.
Here.
Councilmember Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Vice Mayor Jensen.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Leonardis.
Here. Leading us in our Pledge of Allegiance this evening is one of our former mayors. It's John Lochner. Can you please come forward? I'll share a few words about John. John has lived in Los Gatos since 1954, which is a little while. I think it's about 65 years. John, as I mentioned, was one of our former mayors. I know he is a Lions Club member. I know that John is on the Veterans Memorial Foundation. He's a board member leading us in the construction of the memorial for the veterans out front, along with his team. John just turned 90 years old. Congratulations, a couple months ago. But he's still very active in our community. And one thing about John that I absolutely love, there are many things, but every year at our Christmas tree lighting, John leads us in song, Christmas carols. He has this incredible energy and this incredible voice. And John will be singing with us tonight after we say the Pledge of Allegiance. John, would you like to add anything to what I just said about yourself? Because your comments were very brief, but I know you've done a lot.
I'm also on the board of Billy Jones.
He's also on the board of the Billy Jones Railroad. Is there anything else? I'm sure there is, but will you lead us in the pledge?
Sure. Would you all join me, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, while you're all standing, and we have a full house here tonight, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to sing America the Beautiful, all right? Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of green, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea. Thank you.
John, wait, come back. I forgot to mention you were in the Lions Club, but also you must shake hands with everyone before you leave. This is for you. Thank you, John.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll cherish it. Thank you
All right.
much.
One more round of applause for Mr. John Lochner. Next on our agenda is our consent calendar. Is there any member of council that wants to pull an item from consent this evening? I see none. What about the public? I see none. Can I get a motion on the consent calendar, Vice Mayor?
Move approval of consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 3.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Moving on to verbal communications. Does any member of our audience wish to speak on anything which is not on our agenda this evening? I see none. We will move on to our other business, which is item number 4, providing direction for potential amendments to the town's below market price program. And our staff report will be delivered by Mr. Joel Paulson.
Thank you. Well, staff doesn't really have much to add. The mayor was interested in putting this on the council agenda for some discussion to see if there was any ideas or thoughts about modifying either the guidelines or the BMP regulations, which were last updated in 2009. The mayor has provided some suggestions, which are included in attachment 5, and staff is here and available to answer any questions. In addition, there was a desk item answering a council member's questions that was provided today.
All right, thank you, Mr. Paulson. Are there any questions for staff at this time? We'll go with Councilmember Sayak first.
If you could just clarify for me, our inclusionary zoning laws, do they apply to subdivision acts or just plan developments?
So our inclusionary housing, which is our BMP regulations, apply to all subdivisions.
Okay.
And it's 5 or more units is the trigger.
Okay, and then my other question to you is, if you were, and I just thought of it, so I apologize for not asking it earlier. Are you aware of other cities, what they do if it's 2 or more? Like, what's the threshold that most cities tend to start to include inclusionary zoning?
Unfortunately, I don't have
Okay.
any other feedback. I'm not sure if Ms. Pravetti, with her other experience.
It varies quite a bit. For some communities, it's actually much higher than what Los Gatos has, 10 or more, 20 or more, 50 or more. It just depends upon the scale of the community.
And I think I've seen as low as 3, but that's the exception, 4, 5, and 10. It seems like I'm trying to think of 6, and I don't remember seeing a 6 to 9, but it's something that we certainly could research. But yeah, I think you'll find it all over the board.
Mr. Paulson, I'll ask a question that just dawned on me earlier today. Developments like the Sisters development or the Highlands, do we have below-market homes which were required in those developments?
We don't. So the Highlands paid in lieu fees, which is allowed currently as well for planned developments with an underlying zoning of HR. The Sisters was a standard subdivision, and it was done prior to a change that was made where there was a loophole. So no BMP requirements were required for that subdivision.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Rennie.
Why don't I wait till after public comment, then I'll ask a question. I think it might be more relevant to discussion.
All right, any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the public hearing. I have no speaker cards on this item, so if anybody wants to speak, please come forward now. I see no one, so we will move on to discussion and or motions. Vice Mayor.
Okay. Mayor, thank you for putting this item on. Unfortunately, not for the reasons you identified, because I did go through the policy, and I don't know that I may get to a motion regarding it, but there are several things in it that suggestions that I have sort of in keeping with Councilwoman Sayak's comments. And I'm going to do it by way of our guidelines, which mirror the ordinance. So Section 2A is applicability, which Councilwoman Sayak was talking about. And our threshold is 5. And I'm going to preface my comments by saying that in the environment where we are looking at the CASA Compact and state legislation, I think that Los Gatos needs to be proactive in trying to expand opportunities for affordable housing so that we can point to those efforts and demonstrate that we are responsible in addressing it and do it effectively. And I have some suggestions about how we might be more effective. So with applicability, I think we should look at is a 5 threshold correct? And should it be, because we have so few lots now in town that are available for a 5-unit subdivision that we're rarely going to get that. So I think we need to be looking at other opportunities. And so one of the suggestions that I have would be where we lose some kind of affordable housing is, let's say there's for example, a county annexation. Someone buys a house cheaply, and now that house, by a developer, the house gets renovated, it gets put into Los Gatos, and it's doubled or tripled in its market value. And the town hasn't captured any of that money for affordable housing. And so in looking at some various documents, the City of Los Angeles in December of 2017 adopted what it calls a linkage fee, and it includes various developments. Could be a single-family residence, it could be commercial that's converting to residential. So for example, like an industrial that's not very valuable goes to residential, they make a lot of money. So the city is trying to capture some of that those fees or that profit for its fund. And I have a copy if anybody's interested. But for example, if a house gets renovated and it adds 1,500 square feet, which we get on like high-low or whatever, there are fees that are associated with each square foot that you add, and the fees are actually tied to market areas. So using Los Angeles, if you're in Pacific Palisades, you might pay $3 a square foot. If you're in South Central, you might pay $1 a square foot. And then there's exemptions to encourage affordable housing. So accessible dwelling units are exempted. Just an idea that I think we should be looking at. Page 2, section B3, sale versus rental, that also came up. I understand the motivation originally was that we wanted to basically have an integrated, and this comes up later, affordable units with market rate units and not necessarily have any kind of stigma, if you will, attached to something looking different. But it may be that we get more units if we allow different types in different developments, and you might be able to somehow work with people to get either funding or more units. And so we should think about relooking at shall be a single family home or shall be a rental in that kind of context, because they're different kind of products. And as I understand it, for arena purposes, a unit is a unit is a unit is a unit. So let's see. Our section D in lieu fees, they're set at 6% of the building permit valuation for the entire project. And I'm wondering, since that was done in 2009, is that still appropriate? Have we looked at whether or not that's an appropriate fee? Does it now reflect the value of that in a way that we're capturing what we were capturing in 2009 for funds? Housekeeping, page 3, section E, says the money's going to the housing fund, and one of the things that we can use it for is for things developed through our Los Gatos Redevelopment Agency, which we don't have. Page 4, section 3, characteristics of BMP units. We talk about size, and we say reasonably consistent with market rate units. And I'm saying, well, is that appropriate in developing units? If there's a 6,000 square foot house and there's two of them, do we really want a 6,000 square foot affordable project? Because we're not going to get the same kind of thing. Location dispersed throughout the development, indicating that a concentration will not be allowed generally. This came up with North 40, where the senior affordable had to be grouped together by the nonprofit rules, and our regulations indicated that we could not do that, and it was difficult to get those units in or a senior project in to a mixed-use development for that reason. So I think we ought to be looking at that as well. D, project facilities. We say all project facilities and amenities, including parking, must be available on the same basis to the BMP. So as an example, what the state is doing increasingly, and what we did with our accessory dwelling units, is reduce the parking requirement, because that's very expensive, and it encourages or allows the availability of more funds. So for example, surface parking costs $25,000 approximately for one space, underground $50,000 for one space. So if you were to take that money and reduce that parking, how many units could you get from that? What kind of funds would we generate, and how could we make development of affordable more attractive by reducing that cost? Those are just some of my ideas. So I guess where I'm going with this, we'll see what other council people think. This is a good opportunity for us to look at this. I think it would be a good demonstration that Los Gatos is being proactive and responsible in developing affordable housing, and it's a good prelude to when our new cycle comes up for our arena. And it might be appropriate to send this to policy committee and actually take a good look at it and see what are the things we could do.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go backwards and then forwards. I was really proud of Los Gatos in the 1979-1980 timeframe when it enacted its BMP ordinance, because it was doing something that other communities, few had done and we were right at the beginning. And I thought it was great because every once in a while, even back then, people would talk about how we're an elitist community or an expensive community. And we had a BMP ordinance. And that ordinance, as Ms. Jensen has pointed out, did require that it would apply and the units would be dispersed throughout the development. They could be homes, single-family units. They could be in apartments, could be rental, could be for purchase. And I think all of those things are great. Again, looking back, I think they're great, and it used to make me proud when we had a new development in Los Gatos, and I would walk around it, and I would know that somewhere in there was a below market rate unit or below market rate units, and you didn't know. And these units could be apartments, they could be single-family homes, and you didn't know where they were or where they were in the community. That's looking back, and I found that all very positive. But I agree that, and I'm sure this is not why this is on the agenda, but I agree that going forward, we could even update the ordinance to make it more applicable to the situation that we have in our housing arena today, today, and make it even more, make more homes, more apartments, more units, more affordable for our community.
Thank you, Councilmember Spector. Any other comments? I just want to echo the comments that I've heard so far. When I first put this on the agenda, I knew we had a light agenda this evening, so I figured let's take a look at this. It's been since 2009 since it was last looked at, and since I've been on council, have had numerous experiences with the below market program and numerous thoughts, and of course I come from a real estate background, so I think of all kinds of other things. And going back and looking at best practices in other communities that have been done, I came up with a list of some probable ideas, but I like the additional comments that I've heard from the other council members because that's what we're here to do. We're here to take a look at this and use it as an opportunity to improve the overall code. So when I came up with the list, I'm glad that each one of us has ideas in our own minds that we bring forward, and I would have no problem at this point making a motion to send this back to our policy committee and have them go through it and tighten it up and bring new ideas forward and bring best practices from the other communities. And let's see if we can do more for more people. So that's my motion. Vice Mayor.
Second?
So I have a motion and a second. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you. Just want to make a couple comments. I think I liked everything Councilmember Jensen said. She spoke kind of quickly, so I would have loved to be on the policy committee and talk it through more in detail. I like generally most of the points in the mayor's suggested, but the one point I wanted to make, and you have the desk item about my question, I'm a little concerned about things where, like we say, you know, I think he said, make sure all future BMP are apartments when possible. And so my concern would be to make sure that the developers are building the BMPs and not getting into a corner where our requirements are really making it so that they just give us money instead of the BMP. As you saw from the answers in the desk item, when we collect money from BMPs, we don't get enough to be able to go buy land or go buy units and convert them. We've been collecting some and we still don't have enough to do anything with. So it's a lot more efficient for developers to do the BMPs. So generally, Councilmember Jensen's ideas all seem to be around how do we make this more flexible? How do we make it easier for them to generate these below market kind of units? So I want to focus our discussion or keep it away from items that might make it more difficult for them to be built by the developer.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. In response to that, I have always preferred units rather than in lieu fees. And I wish actually that we didn't have the in lieu fees. So I do not anticipate that at least one half of the policy committee would be encouraging funds as opposed to units.
Councilmember Sayak.
Okay, so a couple comments, and I do support the idea of this going back to the policy committee, some things that I would ask the policy committee and staff to look into. Again, the initial question I had of what triggers the BMP with the 5 or more, understanding that our inclusionary, it's 20%, so I could see perhaps an in lieu fee when you have less than 5. But again, any ideas that can spur more affordable housing or contributing to that fund would be great. And another thing I'd like staff to look at is, I know with certain providers and with transitional housing, they provide incentive. They don't necessarily provide incentives, but there are requirements on how much is set aside for those that are residing there to be saving. The idea is that they want movement so that as they are in the affordable housing, there's a set aside for them to then begin saving for their first and last or deposit so that they can move on to their own purchase, and then that allows the unit to be used for the next person. Because understanding we don't have enough, the idea to really create some movement so that those that are in the housing have the opportunities to start saving for their own individual wealth and eventually home ownership.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
In the interest of trying to make sure that the policy committee is not deadlocked going in, my suggestions were in addition to units and to generate units. So it's, yes, the objective is a unit, and sometimes you get that from money, and you might get that from an in lieu fee that we already have or modified in our current ordinance, or you might get that from the kind of linkage fee that I was discussing in Los Angeles.
So I will comment at this time. When it comes to things like in lieu fees, and it comes to things like the amount of units that would trigger a threshold that a certain amount would be BMPs, I'm hoping that we could do an analysis of best practices in our surrounding areas. When it comes to things like should there be single-family owned properties, and I questioned Mr. Paulson from the outset about was there a BMP in this subdivision or was there one in this subdivision. The reason why I chose those two subdivisions was because those are very expensive homes, and I would assume that the in lieu fees that we received were significant enough to build the equivalent of one of those expensive homes, but perhaps not, so perhaps that's something that could be looked at. But even if they chose to build 1 or 2 homes in those subdivisions, that serves 1 or 2 families. And when I included in my list of potential changes, it wasn't like a mandate that we build all apartments for BMPs, but I thought when the North 40 potentially comes in the future, or a development such as, if we're really trying to meet the needs of more individuals that are looking for entry-level housing, that apartment buildings and a certain amount of apartment buildings, say 40% or whatever, become BMPs would be serving more individuals than, say, one house here and one house there. But again, this discussion will be among or be sent to the policy committee, and I hope that they come up with best practices and even more ideas to serve more people, and then bring this back to council in the future. So with that said, do we have any more discussion on this item? Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you. If I could just maybe add one more concern. The policy, the BMP policy setup is really set up so that it's not obvious from the outside that they're BMP units, that they kind of mesh in with whatever's been built. And I kind of like the idea of, yeah, let's be more flexible, so maybe we get more BMP units or we get them more often or something. But I still like the idea of making sure they don't look too much different, you know. And part of, you know, I've observed, unfortunately, there's prejudice in town against, you know, everywhere against low income. If if we were to try to build a large, let's say we saved up all of our BMP money and tried to build 30 units, maybe somewhere like Ditto's Lane, the response is, I'm not going to want 30 low-income people living next to me. Unfortunately, that's what we see happen. I'm kind of showing you the dirty rocks, but there's a reason for making it fit in, and whatever we change, let's sort of keep that in mind a little bit, that it does sort of fit in, maybe even if it is an apartment, that it sort of melds in with whatever townhouse that's there or something, versus looking like it's set off on the side as a project. I know we wouldn't do that, but let's think about it a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie. And again, my experience thinking about it, I think we've done a great job with it since at least I've been on the council, with making them fit and dispersing them throughout the community. I realize that Ditto's Lane was a difficult project as was originally proposed. When I think of BMP and apartment units, I think of the first Netflix development, and I know that serves a whole lot of people, and I know we don't drive by there and look at that and think that there's any differentiation among the units, and as well as some of the other ones that have come along. Laurel Muse has BMP's, I guess you would call it the Blossom Hill, the Swanson Ford development, the Lester Center, and the one over there on Kennedy and Caldwell. So those are the ones that I've experienced about the time I've been on council. And for the most part, we have them dispersed all throughout the town. And I don't think we've had any issues with them standing out. So with that said, we have a motion and a second. I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll be moving on to item number 5, which is direction regarding potential town council member term limits.
Thank you, Mayor. As stated in the staff report, we've provided you with information regarding term limits in nearby communities, as well as what the process would be, which according to current California state law, you would need to place a measure on the ballot to ask the voters to determine the term limits. In that measure, you would need to specify what the term limit proposal would be. There are several options in your staff report for consideration. Alternatively, the council may choose that having no term limits essentially allows the voters to determine when it's time to elect somebody new. So staff is available for questions, and the mayor may wish to add additional commentary. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. My question is, our latest experience in putting something on the ballot was the tax measure. How much did that cost the town?
I don't know if our town clerk has that dollar figure at hand. I know we did ask the registrar for their upcoming fee schedule in anticipation of the interest of what the financial impact would be.
I don't have the cost of just the measure, but the total election for the 3 seats and the measure was almost $82,000.
Other questions? I'll make some comments on this. Again, it was a light agenda evening, and this came to light through the process of putting this on the agenda. In the past, it was upon the council to make a decision whether we wanted to decide to just adopt an ordinance requiring term limits for council members. But now it is up to the voters, which actually is a better way to do it, really, because all we would be doing is deciding whether we would want the voters to decide whether we should have term limits or not, as opposed to we individuals deciding to put term limits on our own positions. So I think in a way that works out well. In the overall scheme of things, it will be done potentially, if the council sees merit in the idea, during the 2020 election. And there's a long time between now and 2020, but we will be having an election anyway, so it would be a good time to do it. And if staff could comment so the public can hear how it would affect the existing council.
The ballot, the earliest this item could be considered by our voters would be in November of 2020, which means then that it would go into effect in the 2022 election. So it would not be effective immediately.
And would it be retroactive? Say at that point in time, somebody's been on the council 12 years, would they be termed out at that time, or would, because they're already what we would call grandfathered in, not subjected to the term limits?
That would totally be up to the language of the ballot language in the ordinance that would be developed. So if council decides that it wants to pursue this, then through that process, we'd have public hearings for you to determine what the ballot language should be and what the ordinance should say. So I've seen them both ways on whether it was grandfathered in or it was not grandfathered in the terms of existing council members.
Thank you. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I know the answer to this, but a question of staff. I'm assuming that the ballot measure would have a specific provision, i.e. 2 terms, 3 terms, whatever, as opposed to options.
Exactly. It would say the specific terms, 2 terms, 3 terms, 4 terms. It would even have the specific language of whether it has to be consecutive or not. Let's suppose you could run 2 terms and take 2 years off. Could you then start over, or would they be cumulative? And again, whether the current sitting council members, that would be taken. Those would be all the issues that council would discuss and make that determination as you would write the ordinance in the ballot language.
Vice Mayor.
I was surprised that the answer was to the question of whether it could be retroactive was you could write it however you want. Let's assume that the ballot measure was 2 terms, somebody ran for a 3rd term, got elected, and then, 2 years later, because we wrote it that it was retroactive, that person gets thrown off. Then the town has to conduct special elections?
No, I think in that situation where they're mid-term, I meant more of including those first 4 years of the 8-year term.
Oh,
could be included.
I
don't
heard
think
the
we
mayor's
would write
question
it.
as you get elected and you're tossed.
I wouldn't. You'd at least be able to serve out your 4 term. You just couldn't run again because you were either over it or already over it if you
Okay.
included the retroactive.
That was the intention of my question.
I was thinking about the cost of a special election in the middle of everything else.
Councilmember Sayoc.
So if you could just walk me through the process, because I'm looking at attachment 2, and so I'm looking at what happened in Saratoga. The voters passed something. However, it says there are no legally mandatory term limits in place. So you have to put something on the ballot. It gets passed, and is there another step that has to occur before this takes into effect? Or I just want to better understand what the process is so that what the various steps are. How does one become a voluntary versus one become legally required?
So in Saratoga, what they did is just an advisory ballot measure. So it's not mandatory, but that's
So
what
it
the
was
public
written as an advisory.
It was written
I
as
see.
an advisory
Okay.
ballot.
Okay. And then my second question, before we put the tax issue on the ballot, we actually did some, formal polling from a couple years ago. And if the clerk or someone from staff could give me a rundown, an approximate cost of what a polling would be. I mean, I would like to know what people think about the issue. I'd also like to know how much it's going to cost. So if there's an easy way or a more cost-efficient way to do a poll.
My recollection is we paid about $15,000 for the polling that was done for the tax measure. That was back in the 2015 era. And it probably depends on how many questions we ask. We were testing essentially one ballot set of language in that poll, but we would have to go out in the market and see what surveyors would be charging at this point. But assume around 10 to 15, maybe 20,000.
More follow-up. And then I don't know if this is correct, but if the last election cost us $80,000, can I just assume that each part of that was $20,000? So the polling question would cost the same as just putting something on the ballot?
No, it's really two separate tasks. So we would do the polling is really information for you as elected officials to
Right.
determine whether or not you even want the measure to go onto the ballot. So it would be informational. So that would be essentially a sunk cost that we would absorb into our budget if so directed. Then if you do decide to go forward with the measure, the estimated cost from the registrar of voters is based on whatever the fee schedule is set by the Board of Supervisors. And once we're on that path, we're committed to paying whatever those costs are. And
Okay.
the estimate, so in 2020, we'll have 2 council seats up plus a measure. So 80,000 is probably in the ballpark, even with some inflation factors.
It's probably in the ballpark. For measures, they assume 6 pages for the measure for the ballot, the sample ballot. So they do that, plus you've got the 2 council seats. So that's where they start their calculations. So they break it down. The council seats are different than the measure.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Rennie?
So my question is, it doesn't really say in the staff report, what problem are we trying to solve? It's not clear to me.
We're just bringing this for your discussion. There is no problem. I think, for some communities, having no term limits actually enables a council to consider long-term issues and think beyond just a typical 2-year or 2-term cycle. There's also the trend of, well, maybe we should have term limits. It might give other people an opportunity to participate in this process. So it really just depends on your perspective, but there is no problem. It's been a few years since the council's had this conversation, so and the mayor requested that we bring it forward for a refresh and for your consideration.
Is staff aware of any of the community asking us to consider this?
No.
Okay, thanks.
And another reason why I thought this would be a great opportunity to bring it forward is because some communities are being challenged about districting. So in the future, I will be the first to admit everybody I serve with up here, I very much enjoy working with, and you're all wonderful statespeople. And if we were all up here for a very long time, that would be a very good thing because we have a lot of experience in things. But I think about the long-term effects as well of having no term limits. There's a reason why they were invented, and there's a reason why the majority of cities in the valley have them, and they have different variations of them. And when I think of my experience up here, I think, well, sometimes people have 2 terms. When I was up here, the first term I was kind of learning the ropes. The second term I became better, and now I feel like as time has gone on, I've gotten even better. But there is a point where you may face some kind of law of diminishing returns or whatnot, or new people bring new ideas to the community. They bring a fresh voice and a new perspective. So that's obviously one point. So I think the best time to address, in reference to Mr. Rennie's question, is there a problem? There isn't a current problem. I think the council and the staff, everybody's doing a great job. This would be being proactive about and taking, rather than reacting to a problem, putting something on to potentially have more open government for the future. And if districting was something that came upon Los Gatos in the future, I think this would be helpful in that circumstance as well. And the best thing about it at this point in time is it's no longer a decision that we as council members have to make for ourselves, because I think in the past that was challenging for some people. This would be something that we put forward to the voters to decide. And I'll leave, with one last comment. Another reason I brought this forward was every time I tell people that the Los Gatos Town Council doesn't have term limits, they say, how long are you on there for? And I say, oh, well, I just got reelected. How long have you been there? I say, well, I've been there, I'm on my 3rd term. They said, 3rd term, you don't have term limits? And I say, well, Los Gatos doesn't have term limits. So sometimes I feel like their expectations are that there should be some kind of term limits. Now, there's a lot of leeway in the staff report what that exactly means, but like the president of China, Xi, this isn't necessarily a job for life either. I know that when you run for election, some people, making reference to Ms. Pravetti's comments, might not be encouraged to run. I know historically when I have run, there has been few people showing up for to serve, running for office. And I think part of the reasons is because they know it's very hard to beat an incumbent, and they know it costs a lot of money. They know it will cost a lot of time and effort to put forth a very robust and perhaps expensive campaign. And I think it dissuades people in those circumstances. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or whether folks have a difference of opinion in this community about that, I think that's up for the voters to decide. But we will see with this council how we deliberate. We have one speaker card, Mr. John Shepherdson. We have a more. Okay, so Mr. Shepherdson, would you please come forward? If anybody else wishes to speak, please bring a card to the clerk.
John Shepherdson. I was going to say maybe I would wait to hear what you were going to have to say, and then I would speak. But I don't really have a position on this agenda item, but I do have some comments, and I made some notes. One is I wasn't clear on the cost, because it's going to be on the ballot, and there's council members that are going to be on the ballot that those positions. But the question is, what is the incremental cost associated with putting this on the ballot? That's the question I had. Is it going to be, if it's 80,000, 40,000, or is it going to be 20,000? That's one question I had. Also, as a question for other municipalities that have had term limits, have they found them ineffective and gone back to the traditional model? Is a question I had. Another question was community sentiment, and Councilmember Sayoc addressed that, and there's the issue of polling. And then historically, I was curious, why has Los Gatos been without term limits? Historically, why are we sort of the minority in terms of local municipalities? It was curious also, we could put it on the ballot as an advisory like Saratoga. That's another way of kind of doing polling. Councilmember Rennie raised an interesting point, and is do we have a problem? Do we have a problem in Los Gatos with this? And if there's not a problem, then do we need to take action? I do think it is important because it goes to the core issue of democracy, of who our representatives are. And if it's term limits, then it's automatically changed. So there's not many people here tonight, but it is an important issue in terms of democracy functioning at the local level. And because Los Gatos, just because other municipalities are doing it, doesn't necessarily mean that Los Gatos should. We're an independent municipality, and we can go our own way. 34 seconds. There was a mention of the law of diminishing returns. Well, I thought of it just now. I just thought of, there's also the law of accelerating returns. And we saw an example of that tonight, I think, when Councilmember Spector mentioned back in 1979 and 80 with respect to the BMP. She brought that expertise and knowledge to this forum here today. So there's also that expertise or law of accelerating returns. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherdson. All right, I will close the public hearing on this and go back to council for a Vice Mayor.
I'm just going to try a motion. We considered this back in 2014, and ultimately we concluded that we would not go forward with taking action on it because there was no hue and cry from the public for term limits, and in fact we have 2 council members sitting here in their 3rd term right now. I, for one, 4th? Oh, okay, 4th. Oh my goodness. Okay, 4 and 3 And they were elected, and certainly people could run against them and did. And so I don't think that I kind of am not a fan of the artificiality of the term limit. I would rather make the voters have responsibility for choosing who their elected officials are and who chooses to run. I also think that given that we spent an hour earlier this evening talking about our pensions, that we should not be doing something where we're not addressing a problem, as Councilmember Rennie said. It is an expense. Polling is an expense. And I certainly haven't heard any clamor for term limits. So I would not be in favor of us taking an action going forward on this unless there is something that we get from the public indicating that they would like us to do that. That's not there. And given the expense, my motion is that we table this question.
Vice Mayor, or I'm sorry, Councilmember Sayoc.
So initially coming into this, I was actually thinking, and I still am, leaning towards term limits. Oh, I'm sorry. You need a second? Oh, okay. Then I'm going to wait for my comments.
Well, I thought that she could be the one who was going to bring us a second after she made her comments, but we'll see. That's why I called on her. But apparently,
I think you should call someone else.
Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you. I suspected she wasn't ready to second, so that's why I interrupted you. I apologize, Mayor. So I will second the motion, but go ahead and add my reasons why. One was I don't see what the problem is we're trying to solve. When I look at our council, we have a mixture of tenure. I think it's good to have people that have been here for a couple, 1, 2 people that have been here for a while to help us remember what things were like. When I tried to remember back in recent memory, it sounded like we were talking about maybe 3 terms as the limit, and I can only think of 3 people in recent memory that have gone beyond 3 terms: Councilmember Spector, Councilmember Brzezinski, and Councilmember Joanne Benjamin are the only ones I can think of in recent memory. So it's not like we've had this terrible problem of lots of council, the whole council full of people that won't ever get off and give new people a chance. So I'm failing to see that there's a problem to solve. Then I see there's a lot of advantages to having the expertise. I know when I first came to council, it probably took me half or more of my first term really to get comfortable with everything. And I know when I first started, I'm kind of just going by what's in the council in the staff reports. That, well, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. I don't have any other expertise or experience so far. So effectively, if you have a council that's fairly newbie, you're more or less just doing what staff recommends, and that's not what people elect you for. They elect you to be their representatives, while staff is not their representative. This is not meant to be a slight on staff, but I will say that, I was talking to Assemblyman Rich Gordon a couple years into his first term, and he said exactly that. When he first got to Assembly, he noticed that he had to just do what staff members were telling him because he didn't know what was going on. So effectively, staff was running his assembly position for him for a couple years. And at the assembly level, he didn't like, even though they have 12, 14 years, he thought it was not so good to turn it over for those reasons. Again, it gave staff a lot more of control of what was going on versus the people that are elected by the people to do that. Another advantage I see is, particularly if you're interested in county boards and commissions outside of Los Gatos, it takes, and there's advantages to being on those. I mean, we had somebody, it took him more than his 12 years to get to be chair of the VTA. So, imagine chair of VTA, you have quite a bit of influence to bring advantageous things to Los Gatos. There's other boards and commissions you could end up working your way up to, but it takes a long time to do that. I know that there's people that have been on MTC, which is a very powerful board. If we could get somebody up to MTC, they've been there, there's people that have been there for 20 years and, kind of work among themselves. So even if you get to MTC, the Metropolitan Transit Commission, which oversees lots of transportation kinds of funding and other things, grants and so forth. Even if you just get there, you've got to be there a while to kind of get a working relationship. So it's going to take you years to get there, and then it's going to take you some years to get a working relationship. So anyway, my point is it's advantageous to have council members from Los Gatos that are around for a while and long enough to work their way up to leadership positions in the county that can help bring things to Los Gatos. That was long-winded second.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second, and I guess we'll listen to more discussion at this time, since we were kind of stopped in the middle of the discussion.
Actually, I just had a question of staff that was triggered by something the mayor had said. I know several of our neighboring communities have looked into districting. I personally don't like that idea, but I wanted to see if there was any update, anything you may have heard about districting that's moving towards the West Valley?
We have received indication that the city of Campbell received the letter to move forward with districting, and so presumably they will be looking at that process. To my knowledge, no other West Valley community has received the letter.
Morgan Hill received it last year, and they went to districts. So Campbell is in the process of going to districts.
Okay. And so no city, depending on size, has been spared, even small cities?
That's correct.
Okay. So in general, I've given this some thought, and I think I am in support of term limits. I like the idea of 3 consecutive terms. What does make me pause is the idea that we may have to go to district elections, because now you've just narrowed your universe of potential candidates even further. But understanding that this is an exploratory idea, I am supportive of the idea of term limits, and therefore not supportive of the motion.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, passes unanimously. Moving on to... What? Okay, it passes 4-1. Thank you. All right, and with the dissent from Councilmember Sayoc. I thought you said aye. I apologize. So the motion carries. Moving on to item number 6, which is the applicant, Town of Los Gatos, is considering shared parking, a zoning regulation change to allow for shared parking. Mr. Khan will be delivering our staff report.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. Before you tonight is a consideration of amendments to Chapter 29 of Town Code regarding shared parking. In February of last year, the Town Council Policy Committee considered initiatives to streamline application process for town businesses. One of the topics that was discussed was shared parking. In January of this year, the proposed amendments for shared parking were reviewed by Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission forwarded recommendation for approval to the Town Council. Under the current ordinance, a conditional use permit is required for businesses interested in shared parking. The intent of the proposed amendments is to streamline the review process by no longer requiring a CUP and to make it affordable for businesses interested in shared parking. The amendments would replace the term alternating uses with shared parking, allow the community development director to approve shared parking through an administrative parking permit, which would be reviewed at staff level. It would also remove the CUP requirement for alternating uses from the table of conditional uses. Staff recommends Town Council review the proposed amendments and introduce the ordinance by title only. This concludes staff's presentation, and we're here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Do we have questions at this point in time? Seeing none, we will go to the public hearing. I have no speaker cards. So does anybody wish to speak on this item? I see no one coming forward, so we'll close the public testimony and look to council for a motion on this item. Vice Mayor Jensen.
make a motion to introduce an ordinance attachment 4 by title only, affecting amendments to Chapter 29 for shared parking. As a member of the policy committee and also somebody who's been considering shared parking for a long time and looking at what our sister cities do, and looking at how land use works and how parking might work into the future, this is long overdue. And I hope that we can move forward with using our parking as efficiently as possible. And so my motion is that we introduce this ordinance.
Do we have a second? Councilmember Sayoc is on the second. Do we have any discussion on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Moving on to other business, item number 7.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes. Oh, we have to read the ordinance. Sorry.
Ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the Town Code regarding shared parking.
Thank you. Now we will move on to item 7, which is consider adopting 2 resolutions related to business streamlining opportunities that reduce the timeline and cost of specific town processes. And one of those will be minor exterior alterations to buildings, and the other one will be considering the suspense of item 2021 or ordinance 2021 for 9 months. Ms. Monica Wren will be delivering our staff report on this.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Monica Wren, Economic Vitality Manager. As the Mayor stated, I'm here tonight to present to you, to recommend to you that we adopt 2 resolutions. The first is a resolution to modify how conditional use permits are approved for restaurants. This would be for until the end of 2019. We would be approving, if this is approved, we would approve them at the DRC level, which is our Development Review Committee. It is still a public hearing. And in order to make that happen, Ordinance 2021 would need to be suspended as well. And then the second, as you mentioned, was a resolution to allow exterior modifications that are minor to commercial buildings, such as awnings, windows, and doors, to be done at a building permit level. In the interest of time, I know that you've all reviewed the staff report. I have a couple of things to mention, and then, of course, I'm here to answer any other questions. We're bringing these forward tonight as a part of the strategic priorities and to continue the streamlining in an effort to reduce the cost and reduce the time that's associated with doing business in Los Gatos. As many of you are aware, we've had more vacancies than usual pop up, especially in our downtown. And what we've heard from residents, from the restaurants in particular, is that the cost of doing business is on the rise. The minimum wage has gone up significantly in this area, and that there are a lot of other hurdles and barriers that it takes to keep a business vital and successful in town. So with this opportunity, with so many vacancies, bringing this forward and allowing for some new businesses to come in, new businesses to consider Los Gatos who may be between 2 jurisdictions, it seemed like a good time to bring this forward. The second resolution for the exterior modifications, the only thing I want to point out there is that we do have commercial design guidelines, and we still have our historic preservation committee. Those things would not go away. So by removing the DRC need for these exterior modifications, we as staff could manage them at the building permit level and then use those as our guides to vet the applications. As I said, I'm here if you have any other questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there questions from council? At this time, seeing none, we will go on to the public hearing. I have one speaker card for Mr. John Shepherdson. If anybody else wishes to speak, please bring a card forward.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some brief comments. One, if the proposal keeps the standards of Los Gatos and expedites the process, seems to make sense to me. And then on a sort of a larger scale, and I've said this before, I suggest we bring in someone like Management Partners to look at the operations of the town, all the way around the town, to see if we can find ways to streamline things, to make it better for the community, to raise more revenue, to reduce costs. So I reiterate that. And then my last point is, there was a comment about vacancies in town, and that that may not all be the fault of the town. If you're raising rents for the tenants, where it no longer becomes feasible for them to conduct business, then that's a factor as well. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, no other cards, so we will close the public hearing on this and look to council for discussion and motions. And Vice Mayor.
I'll just hop right in there again. Thank you, Ms. Wren, for this report and these suggestions, and thank you also for organizing and hosting the breakfast that we had last week, where some of these concerns were raised by members of our business community. So my motion is that we adopt the resolution suspending ordinance 2021. I am very comfortable doing that because of the experience with the formula retail suspension. We have not had a flood of formula retail in, and we've been careful about how that's been managed. And the size of the various spaces available probably limits some availability for restaurant use in any event, but this gives an opportunity for the market to determine what they want, what they'd like to do in town, and continues our message that we are open for business. And obviously we evaluate that at the end of the year if it's appropriate. With respect to the modification for CUPs, for minor exterior alterations, I also move that we adopt that and I guess that's only a trial, but I would rather see it done permanently. But for this purpose, for this staff report, my motion would be that we approve that as well. As indicated, we do have the commercial design guidelines, which may be due for a look, just suggesting, and our historic preservation with respect to any particularly sensitive building or modification. So my motion is that we approve both of these trials and give them a chance.
All right, thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Councilmember Sayoc, second. Discussion? Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you. So I don't think I heard it in your motion, but I assume it's included that we're going to allow all restaurant reviews to be done at DRC now. Is that staff's understanding of her motion?
That's correct, until the end of the year.
Yes, that was the intent to adopt
sorry.
the staff recommendations. And sure, you're correct.
Okay, so we probably have public comments, so I'm going to refrain from making, oh, we did? Okay, good. Then I'll go ahead with my concern is I'm completely for removing the 2021 as suggested, and I like the exterior modifications, changes. My concern is even going to DRC, it's really opening it up. And let me give you my example of what I would think would be bad. And I think so let me start with maybe what I think the solution instead could be to allow non-formula restaurants to go to DRC, but bring formula restaurants still through the normal process. I know that how do you define formula restaurants? For this case, I might make it simple and say if they've got 10 locations or more, we'll call it formula. And I'm most worried about something like the example we heard at the business breakfast was Pete's wanting to go in at the corner of Santa Cruz and Main Street. That, generally I want to let businesses compete, but you don't want to let the behemoths wipe out things in Los Gatos that make us unique, make us Los Gatos. I think Pete's on that corner will take out the Coffee Roasting Company and Great Bear over time, and those are restaurants, or coffee restaurants, what do we call them, that I think make a difference in Los Gatos. If people want to go to Pete's, they don't have to come into downtown. They can go to the Pete's out by the Lenardi's, or maybe it's Starbucks that comes in. They can go to Starbucks somewhere else. And over time, they're going to siphon off enough business from those other restaurants that I'm sure don't have a lot of profit margin that they're eventually going to close. So it's considerations like that worry me, that if, what is staff going to do if Pete's comes to DRC for that location? They're going to say yes because there's nothing that tells them to think otherwise. So I'm concerned about this motion and would ask for the addition of making it just non-formula retail.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
So respectfully, no. The DRC has appeal rights. So if there is something that somebody doesn't like, they can go through the appeal rights on the DRC. We've had discussions about formula retail when I deliberately said formula retail, and also formula restaurant. We've just suspended our formula retail. We haven't had any disaster. As members of the policy committee, we did disagree on formula restaurants because it depends upon what you think is a formula restaurant. If Daniel Boulud has 10 restaurants, do I not want Daniel Boulud in Los Gatos? Or if Joe Robuchon has 10 restaurants, do I not want him in Los Gatos? I think it's entirely subjective on how we evaluate it. So I don't want to go there. I wanted to have an experiment where we say we are open for business, and if it goes through DRC and someone doesn't like it, including Councilman Rennie, there is an appeal right. And we don't have an application for Pete's anywhere, any place.
Did anybody else have their hand up? Seeing none, so we have a motion and we have a second. I will call the question. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
So it passes 4-1. And we will move on to our council and manager reports. Councilmember Sayak.
Thank you. On the 27th, Councilmember Rennie and I did a ribbon cutting for EQ1, a real estate firm, a boutique real estate firm. On Friday, I attended the Regional Economic Forum with the mayor, and on Saturday, I attended the Police Foundation Ball.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since our last council meeting, there was a policy committee meeting, and I also attended the business breakfast. Thank you.
All right. Since our last council meeting, I attended the West Valley Mayors and Managers meeting, and I attended Senator Bell's emergency preparedness pancake breakfast. And Senator Bell gave us some information, which I will have our town staff post on our website, that talks about personal preparedness. And we have some schedules that they will be going around the community and talking, for instance, Wednesday, April 10th at Addison Penzak Jewish Community Center about how you can prepare yourself in the event of wildfires. So I will make sure we get this information on our website. And what else did I do? I attended the Regional Economic Forum with Councilmember Sayak, who did a wonderful job representing our town as one of the panelists. And I also attended the Brokers Breakfast when we invited property owners from downtown. By the way, all 5 council members attended, so that was great. And our staff was present. Ms. Wren, thank you for organizing that, and Ms. Pravetti, where we invited our local business owners, property owners, and real estate community in to tell them many things about how Los Gatos is open for business, and all the things that have changed since in the recent past to reinvigorate our economy here. And last but not least, I cut a ribbon on a business called Boulevard Bites and Brews. Very good food. Check it out. Vice Mayor.
Let's see. I was at the policy committee with Councilwoman Spector. We discussed further efforts for streamlining with land use, not necessarily commercial, demolition permits, demolition ordinance, and other things that we can do to streamline processes in town. I also went to the business breakfast, and I had the pleasure of cutting the ribbon for Lululemon.
Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you. In addition to what was mentioned with my name, I also did a ribbon cutting for the Jewelry Sky Diamond, and I was present at the Bits and Bites ribbon cutting. The VTA board had a workshop on the future of transportation in the county. And I'd say the summary was the board members present unanimously agreed that business as usual or a tweak to the way we're doing business is not acceptable. We need to do something drastically different for transportation in Santa Clara County. The VTA Congestion Management Subcommittee met, and I attended, and they adopted, one of the things they adopted is a speed policy, which included several elements to increase the speed of buses and light rail. One element included working with local municipalities to give priority at lights to buses and light rail. Other elements included finding ways to load and unload faster and developing transit lanes to get through congestion. The slowing speed of the buses is costing VTA millions of dollars a year, because if you're supposed to have a bus arrive every half hour and they can't get around their loop, you have to now pay for an extra bus basically in the circuit to keep up the frequency. Also, VTA Capital Projects Oversight Committee met. We reviewed staff suggestions for the FY 2021 capital plan. This is just the beginning of the process, and the capital plan's on its way out to the public for review. Their capital plan really has three programs. One is their VTA Transit Fund, which strives to keep the VTA infrastructure assets in good repair. The second one is a Measure A program, which includes money for the BART program management, the East Ridge light rail expansion, and the third part is really paying off the transportation bonds that have been put out in the past. The third program is the VTA Highway program, in which they have 20 interchange projects, 1 expressway project, 3 express lanes, 3 bike and ped, and 3 complete streets. I also, in addition to VTA, attended the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority workshop, which was mostly to bring new board members up to speed, because it requires a lot of technical knowledge to make good decisions on that board. In addition, most of the veteran board members, like myself, attended, and because basically we demonstrated our passion for the subject and wanted to be there. And I also attended the business breakfast. That's it.
Thank you. Ms. Pervetti, do you have a manager's report?
Thank you. Just a reminder that we are accepting applications for our many adult commissions, and those are due on April 5th, and we are also accepting youth commission applications, which are due on May 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes this evening's meeting.